Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Well, you know, you sit down and you write out a talk and you worry about the words and the cadence and all those good things and get it all done.
Yep.
And then you get on I-95 and you drive up here and stuff happens. So let's talk a little bit about the language that we speak. Let's talk a little bit about the language that came into my mind as I started to turn in here this morning. And as you know, if you come from the west, there's 2 left turn lanes that turn into the hotel here, or, you know, onto the street that the hotel is.
Yes.
And I've gotten into the left lane because I knew I was going to be turning immediately into the parking lot. And the car in front of me, when the light turned green, made a U-turn, which is fine. You can do that from the inside lane. And I started to move ahead, and I'm thinking, okay, let's punch it and go. And the car in the right-hand lane decided he's going to make a U-turn.
No.
So he comes right across my bow, and I'm like having all sorts of joyous thoughts. But mostly I recognize, although I was reacting with what appeared to be anger, it was really fear, wasn't it? It was fear that I was going to have this collision, that my morning was going to be messed up.
Oh, God.
And I wasn't in fear for my life. We weren't moving that fast, but certainly there was going to be property damage.
Whoa.
And so, you know, fear does appear as anger many times. Most of the time when people are angry, if you get to the root of it, they're really frightened about something.
Yep. Yep.
Well, I had that moment, and I recognized this isn't where I want to be. This isn't doing me a bit of good. I've still got time to do a couple of things here. Number one, get off the gas. Stop adding to the problem. And start looking for my brake pedal and knowing with certainty that the people behind me could see what was happening and were making their own adjustments to keep from hitting me. And it all worked out. And the guy who was turning in front of me suddenly realized what he was doing, and I could see the fear on his face. And the moment passed. And I didn't drive into the parking lot here all full of anger and angst and looking for justice for this terrible wrong that had been done to me. And I got to come in and continue with my normal, peaceful, loving ways. So that is not my talk today, but it certainly fit in with it because I chose words and chose thoughts that said, resolve the issue rather than seek justice for something that hasn't happened yet. We're not going to take questions right now, James. I'm on a roll.
About make you turn to red, you can do it on red.
That's not what we're talking about.
I
this
know,
morning.
but you
So
We didn't
my
make it
talk
out
this
right.
morning has to do with how we do use language, both with ourselves and externally. And it came about when I was watching the Democratic presidential debates and recognized that presidential candidate Marianne Williamson, who has been teaching a course in miracles, a popular New Thought or metaphysical study course for more than 25 years and is well known and respected in the New Thought world, that some part of her popularity stems from the confidence and cadence of her public speaking. It's a skill that shines through in political debate where the need to impart a full and complete concept in short sound bites is critical. As she's becoming known to a wider audience, her use of language and tone have become the butt of late night humor. Because to the uninitiated, the words are unfamiliar and the tenor of her voice unusual. The comedians attribute to her characteristics that are common to the New Age world. The use of crystals, healing oils, sage cleansings, and all manner of mysticism. Well, I'm here to remind you that New Age and New Thought are different things. In the common consciousness, they are confused and thinking that they are one and the same. And of course, they are one and the same in the universal sense in that we are all one. However, the dictionary defines them differently. To be clear, New Thought which is what Science of Mind is, requires no paraphernalia to be practiced successfully. And its ministers and practitioners are merely guides to assist awakening minds on their journey to understanding. My role, when the world has reached its perfect state and each and every person understands their universal spiritual power, my role becomes obsolete. I'm out of a job. So I am working to make myself obsolete. All of our practitioners will become obsolete because each and every person will understand that they have the power themselves to do what needs to be done to stay in alignment with the universal power of love and have those loving experiences that allow them to have a moment of fear, a moment of anger, and immediately back off of it and recognize that that is not where they need to be. Williamson uses words like love, cooperation, commonality, peace, and beauty.
Whoa.
Words that are familiar to us, but strange in politics.
Whoa. Yeah.
Further confusing general audiences, she speaks in complete sentences, delivering fully developed thoughts and ideas without shouting over her opponents, just driving her message through whatever noise they are injecting. She doesn't try to outshout them. She just keeps talking. And by that uniqueness of style, the receptive ear hears. But when she is being interviewed by those same late night hosts that were just doing their monologue and having some fun at her expense, an interesting thing happens. They come from various backgrounds. Most of them have some religion in their background. And they all begin to recognize that her message is in alignment with what they already believe, what they've already been telling through their own humor when they make fun of the politics of our time. You recognize that they're not really backing down from their comedian role, but at the same time they stop and they listen and they let her complete an entire paragraph without interrupting. She immediately gains enough respect that even interviewers who routinely interrupt their guest allow her to finish. It's a very interesting observation. And when I noticed this behavior, I shared the observation with my peers through our email Google group, and really was just doing that as a reminder to myself that we as ministers and practitioners and students of the science of mind, if we've been around a while, we have adopted a private language. And we just need to keep conscious of the fact that when we're speaking to a more general audience, we need to recognize who we're talking to and avoid the use of the little code phrases and words that might be confusing to them. Science of Mind students acquire the language of positive thought, affirmative prayer, and universal power through study and practice, so it is comfortable and expected in settings of our classrooms, churches, and gatherings, but it falls on deaf ears to the people whom the teaching is unfamiliar. They're not accustomed to hearing the words the way we use them. They've got their own definitions of things. They have their own definition of what God is. To them, most of them, I will say, God is that old man in the sky pointing the finger at everybody and sitting in judgment and generally preparing a place for us to come to if we live by the rules. Whose rules is a little vague. But Holmes writes in the Science of Mind textbook that The scientist and the philosopher, the priest and the professor, the humanitarian and the empire builder, all have caught some gleam of the eternal glory, and each has spoken in his own tongue that language which is of itself universal. And what Holmes is saying here is that in the same way that people have developed different languages in different regions of the planet and different dialects within those regions, doctors, engineers, lawyers, accountants, and all manner of tradespeople have developed their own shorthand or precision language that they use to communicate internally. And religions have done the same thing. We've developed certain words and certain phrases that just are internal. And people from the outside will hear them, but they kind of bounce off the ear pan because they just don't understand it the same way. And yet each is using their own words to describe the same universal truth when exploring our spiritual nature. Traditional religions have developed libraries of myths, stories, and parables to describe what Ernest Holm, among others, have simply laid down in straightforward prose. If you read the Science of Mind textbook cover to cover, the only stories or parables you'll see is when he's quoting the Bible. He doesn't talk about, oh, Johnny went to up the mountain and did this and did that. No, he just tells you, Johnny saw the truth, Johnny lived the truth, Johnny had a good life. Those aren't his words, those are mine, but basically he's simply laying out how this thing works, first what it is and how it works, and how we can use it. No stories. In traditional religions, those stories are shaped in a narrative to be understandable by their audience. The New Testament is full of parables because Jesus, the teacher Jesus, back 2,000 some odd years ago, was speaking to an audience that was 0 on the education scale, formally. Now, all of them had some education. If they were sheep herders, they knew all about sheep herding because they grew up in it. If they were carpenters, they knew all about carpentry, or stonemasons. They knew their trades, but they were not educated formally the way we are today, just traditionally. So there was no written language for most of them. So what's the easiest way to remember a point is to simply tell a nice story. And the people, everybody loves a story. You know, you talk about, you don't talk about, oh, you can't tell that guy anything, he's an idiot, he'll never understand it. You say, you don't cast your seeds upon the stone and expect anything to grow.
Yeah.
Well, a farmer understands that, even a sheep herder understands that. That's easy to remember. And we still use stories to tell universal truths, don't we? The force is with you.
Yeah.
Does everybody recognize that story?
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you the story, do I?
Right.
You know what the story is. And that's simply a reminder that our universal power flows through each of us and is controlled by our understanding of its power. When Luke first opened up in the movie, he didn't know about the force. He was using it, didn't recognize it, didn't know how to control it. But he learned how to control it, didn't he? And eventually, miracles happened. The saying of peace, Holmes writes, will not produce peace unless back of the word is a realization of the meaning of peace. So in the simplicity of our own language, we try to convince ourselves of the reality of that for which we are treating, knowing that in such degree as we have an embodiment of the idea, it is thrown into a mechanical field and must operate. So what's he saying here? So in that quote, Holmes used the word treaty, where a general audience would better understand the word prayer. You walk into the average traditional Christian church and say, oh, I'll treat for you. They're like,
What?
but I'll pray for you.
I'll
We
pray
get
for
that,
you.
okay. So, you know, we're okay with saying we're going to do an affirmative prayer for you.
Yeah.
Well, you understand that, that's easy. Why fight where they already are? We always say, take your client, take your person and meet them where they are. You know,
Yeah.
you can't shove it down their throat. You've got to take them by the hand and say, where are we? Now let's go in this direction. So that simple hiccup in the ear, that vagueness of understanding can easily cause the listener to completely miss the point of the quote. Why? Because something bounced off their ear and wasn't absorbed. And now they're like, I'm gonna let you go. You lost me. Oh, what's happening on my phone? Looks like I got a tweet here. You know, it's like, boom, you lost it. Which is simply saying we want a thing. The quote is simply saying that if we want a thing, we cannot produce that thing unless we have a clear understanding of what that thing is. If we say we want peace, and we don't really understand what peace is, some people say, well, peace is the absence of conflict. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
If that's your image, let's focus on that and clear the world up of conflict. To others, peace is simply, you know, I'm pretty confident that in my lifetime, I'm not going to be able to end world conflict, but I can control what I feel in here. I can't stop that car from turning in front of me the way it did, but I can control how I feel in here. I can release my fear and move back to that feeling of love and peace within. Do what I need to do to get through the moment. In our personal spiritual practice, it is important for us to be conscious of what words we choose when speaking our power into the universe. So now let me break that down for a general audience, because I know you all perfectly well understood what I just said. However, not everybody would. So number one, individuals are fully capable of communicating directly with the force that turns our beliefs into our experiences. Personal spiritual practice. That's all that is. It's an acknowledgement that each and every one of us can talk and communicate directly with the power and get the job done. We do not need middlemen, interpreters, shamans, or priests to intervene on our behalf. We have the power. We are fully equal in potential. It is only our educations that differ. I heard one celebrity on a talk show the other day, well, several weeks ago now, but she said, I'm just as smart as they are, I just haven't read the same books. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
No.
We all have the potential.
Yeah.
I was looking at a movie yesterday, I saw, was actually a story about Father Serra, who founded the California mission system. If you're not from California, you don't know anything about this, but early Spanish exploration, came up from Mexico, made 21 missions up the coast of California, ending in the San Francisco area. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching, in the movie, they had relatively authentic looking Indian villages, which were made out of kind of thatch type of material in California, because that's what they had. They had a lot of swampland in Southern California, not just deserts and forests. And this thatch was very good for making material. Now, and the thought occurred to me while watching, I'm going, any human being who existed on the planet Earth for the last 100,000 years, given that environment, would have figured out that we can make a shelter out of this material. It's flexible, it's strong, it can be shaped, you can use it to tie pieces together. Any human being, whether they're alive today or whether they're alive 100,000 years ago, had that same knowledge base that said, we can turn these raw materials into a shelter. And we can figure out how to protect ourselves that way. So the human being, it's just a matter of education. If you grew up reading the Science of Mind textbook, you were blessed with an early understanding of how it works. If you came to it later in life, you had the ability to change your thinking and say, some of the stuff I learned earlier on, yeah, it was, this kind of straightens all that out and makes it make more sense. So number two, Words have power, and that power is dependent on the value we personally assign them in the context of how we use them. Take a moment to reflect on the range of responses you may experience to the word bitch. Context is everything. Speaking our power, expressing our desire, directing our expectations, pray. The universe, number 4, in this context, is God in most traditions. We say universe because it is a term we understand to mean everything. In our understanding, God or Spirit is infinite, unending, without beginning, without end, everything. It's the core concept around our entire teaching. If this power is infinite, we as individuals can be nothing more than simply individual expressions of that infinite. We're a part of it. We're not separate from it. That's why we don't need to beseech it. We don't need interpreters to help us communicate with it. We are a part of it. We're talking to ourselves. We are also wise to be conscious of our language in our internal dialogue. How do we treat ourselves? Are we kind and loving? If not, why not? Science of Mind teaches us that the universal power is a loving force. It produces anything we believe without question or judgment. We are expressions of this universal power, therefore it is our nature too, to be loving and generous. We are out of alignment with the force when we are not kind and loving, and being out of alignment makes life harder. Some call that hell. If your car is out of alignment, you must constantly fight with the steering wheel to keep the car moving straightly down the road. Let go for a second and the car veers off in an unplanned direction that could lead to disaster. When our lives veer off into oncoming traffic or a roadside lamppost, it can trigger a cascade effect that seldom ends well. We let go and we're out of alignment, and suddenly stuff just starts happening that we didn't have in our playbook, and we don't know how to react. Now, the beauty of Science of Mind is that if we catch it, if we recognize that we're veering off into oncoming traffic, we can grab the wheel back and get back into alignment really quickly as far as the road is concerned. But if our thinking is still stinking, we gotta work awfully hard at it and constantly keep pulling on that wheel to keep us in the lane. If we get our alignment straightened out, if our thinking automatically goes in alignment with Spirit, we can pretty much let go of the wheel. You can drive 90 miles an hour down I-95 with one finger on the wheel, as long as everything is in alignment. I don't recommend that. There's other stuff out there that can cause things to happen. You want to have your 10 and 2. But the car in alignment, your soul in alignment, everything moves smoothly and along the way we want it to go. By understanding the power of the words we choose, our communication is more precise. When we are speaking to our family, a coworker, or to the world, or to ourselves, choose words that encourage praise and empowerment. Empower us to be in alignment with the force. Because choosing otherwise leads to the dark side. Disaster it is. Yes. Thank you.